Ruchir, I think the last time we met was in April, May, in Hyderabad, and
Yes.
you were, of course, observing the Indian elections, and I was covering the elections as well. And you were pretty certain at that time that you were not seeing any kind of wave. I think you even wrote a piece saying the only wave around is the heat wave. What is it that you saw, which then has been now reaffirmed with this mandate? It's a 240 mandate and not a 300 or a 350 or even a 400 mandate.
Yeah. So as you know that I may travel the world, but the week that I'm most passionate about, the week that means the most to me is the 1 week of the election trips I do in India. So this was our 31st election trip where we met in Hyderabad, like in around mid-May, early May in fact, is when we met. And we had taken this journey where we sort of drove about 2,000 kilometers, starting from Vijayawada, close to the eastern seaboard, all the way up to Mumbai. And we stopped along the way and practically covered 4 states along the way. And I think that the sentiment that we picked up on these travels, and I'd say that even more so in places like Maharashtra and stuff, is that there was this yearning or desire in India that this thing has become too one-sided. The narratives become too one-sided. The whole thing has become too one-sided. So as I said, and I wrote in the book, like in my piece also, which you're referring to, that there was no great discernible anti-BJP feeling. There were, even for Modi and all, there was no discernible feeling. Yeah. I think a lot of people took, who were on the upside in terms of what he would get, were more focused on that, which is that that there's no discernible anti-Modi feeling, and he's been able to pretty much say what he wants and get what he wants before that, right? Because that was how the state elections had played out and stuff. So that was the feeling that's concerned. But I think that the story which we managed to pick up on our travels and possibly others missed is the fact, this feeling that outside of that base, which was pretty stable, there were lots of people who were feeling that this has become too one-sided. We need an opposition in this country. And this has always been my sort of feeling about India, that our democratic fiber is very strong. We don't like, one-sided battles for too long. There's a sort of natural tendency in us to root for the underdog in terms of that. So I think we're a naturally democratic nation. And so there was a feeling that we need the other side to come up. So I think that what we had in state after state is a consolidation of the vote which happened, where people wanted to back whoever was the winner, or who could be the winner against this very strong force on the other side. So I think that that's the very key message that we observed. And there was also a bit of an urban-rural divide, which is that in the urban side, this idea of India sort of doing really well outside, it's doing really well and all that, and that pride and nationalism was there. In rural areas, I feel that has much less of an echo. And so I think those are some of the trends that we picked up while we were traveling. And I think that in terms of, so I was a bit surprised that why is the narrative the other way? And I think that, but that's the problem also, I think that which this government has to sort of be a bit careful about, which is that it's so focused on the narrative and making sure that everyone buys into that narrative that sometimes you lose connection with the ground reality, when that happens. When people are almost scared to go and tell them that, hey, this is not the reality of what's going on. There's something else that we're picking up on the ground. There's almost a fear for expressing that, because even when I wrote those pieces, there was a lot of pushback. And I'll never forget that time that I'd gone back to New York and the exit polls came out. And in fact, I was also a bit sort of, people told me about that, of people going on television and almost attacking personally me and groups like ours, saying that all these guys come here, live in these elite bubbles and do these trips and don't understand what's happening in real India. So it's like that level of overconfidence which crept in. I think that, all those were points for us. And as I said, that some of it is luck as well. We've done 31 election trips. There are times when we have missed trends as well. But after having done so many election trips, I guess experience at some level matters.
But I do want to ask you, instead of May, if you're taken that road trip in January when the Ram Mandir inauguration happened and Prime Minister was leading the religious ceremonies, it was like he could do no wrong. And this whole Hindutva experiment, it was sort of a culmination of that. But the fact that an opposition sort of keeps pointing to this, that the BJP could not even win in the Ayodhya seat, what do you make of that? Is it that this Hindutva experiment has reached its limits and people are now going back to bread and butter issues, livelihood issues, etc.? or what is your understanding of why the BJP, despite the high point that they reached on January 22nd, both in Mr. Modi's image and this Hindutva project, they were not able to convert that into election gains?
Yeah, but I also feel that there's a certain level of fatigue which sets in like the country, both with leaders and also to do with the issues, right? That like it's like that old line we used to have, that how long can you keep running to the newsroom with the same breaking news, right? Which is that, okay, you can play it once, you can play it twice, but beyond the, like time, people are like, okay, what else, right? So there was a time when I think that some people felt, and make no mistake, there's still a very strong like Hindutva constituency, but there's a time when people felt that we needed a corrective course after what they felt had been a long period of appeasement. And now that you've had much more sort of assertive Hindutva government in power, I think that the feeling that you need even more of that, there are limits to that. There are diminishing returns to that narrative, right? Which is that, okay, you had this feeling of very strong, appeasement, and something needs to be done to counter it. You've done it. Now let's move on to the next issue. You just can't keep on sort of going with, back with the same issue. And the other thing which I've observed is that generally around the world, and I've seen this repeatedly, in fact, and I wrote a piece about this, in fact, when Merkel left office in 2021, it is very rare for leaders to remain popular after 10 years. Even in India's case, if you look at the state leaders and stuff, after 10 years, it gets really difficult to remain popular. I think that you're seeing that even at a state level. I mean, like even in places like Bengal and stuff like that, I think you're seeing signs of that. Now, Bengal is a state which generally gives their leaders a very long rope. Because in terms of the CPI members, they're forever. But even Nitish Kumar, etc. But I'd say generally the trend, and this is not just about Modi, is very difficult for leaders around the world to remain popular after 10 years. In fact, in democratically elected countries, you can almost not find any leader who after 10 years left office on a high or was popular. Merkel, so when I wrote that piece, I remember, was a bit of an exception. So it's very difficult. So I think there's a natural fatigue element with both the issue and the leader which has set in. And after the election, in fact, I've only seen that momentum gather further is the reading that I have.
Okay. So that's it. In fact, Naveen Patnaik lost also, although after much more than 10 years.
Exactly. And I'm saying in general, I mean, these are templates, whether it's 10, but I'm saying that the number of leaders who remain popular after 10 years around the world, especially national, state, maybe even this thing, generally the number is extremely low. There'll always be exceptions. There's no 100% rule out there.
No, of course.
But I'd say that, and even if you look at the stock market, it's very interesting. I've done this study, but India's already defined that in some way, that the longer a leader remains in power, at least from a pure that factor, generally the stock market returns tend to also tail off. Even in America, it's incredible that we're having elections. There's a huge gap between stock market returns in the first term of a leader and the second term of a leader. So these are general rules, and there'll always be exceptions. And in some regards, you can argue India's already defined that.